Welcome everyone to this session of the Literary Lounge. We're here to welcome the very exciting Khalid Matawa today. So the series is a collaboration between the University of Glasgow and the Luxembourg Review. And it's an absolute pleasure. I mean, Khalid, I've been an admirer of your work before we even met at I think it was the South Bank Festival. Yeah, yeah. So so a small introduction to Khalid here. Khalid Matawa was born in Benghazi, Libya in 1964. He's the author of 5 collections of poetry, most recently Fugitive Atlas, which I've been reading, and it's a fantastic book, I must say. Forthcoming in October from Graywolf Press. Matawa is the translator of several books of contemporary Arabic poetry and co-editor of 3 anthologies of Arab American literature. He teaches at Michigan, the University of Michigan, and edits Michigan Quarterly Review. And this is from the Poetry Foundation. Matawa has been awarded several Pushcart Prizes and the Penn Award for Literary Translation, in addition to a translation grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, a Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship, the Alfred Hodder Fellowship at Princeton University, and a MacArthur Fellowship. Please, let's give a warm round of applause to Khalid Matawa for being here. And and before we begin, it'd be lovely if you type in where in the world you're tuning in from today. We've had a very international audience so far for the Literary Lounge, and it'll be lovely to see just what the reach is. And I'd like to invite Khalid to read for us, and then we'll open it up. We'll have a small, brief conversation, and then we'll open it up at the end towards for some questions from the audience. Thank you, Khalid.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here to see so many friends from so many different places. This is really wonderful. Yeah. I'll read the opening poem just as a kind of tribute. This is my first sort of reading from the book as such. Last event was with Graywolf, and it was only one poem. So this one, you'll get more. This one is Taproot and Cradle, just a poem to the manuscript. Evening coffee, and my mother salts her evening broth, not equanimity, but the nick of her wrist. And my mother bakes bread, and my mother hobbles knees locked, and my mother carries the soft stones of her years. O pen of late arrivals, O knife of darkened temples, O my scurrying, my drunken snakes, I deliver her to the earth under summer rain. I remember the killed enemy. I remember my good friends. So that's the beginning poem. To launch kind of lyrical grievance, perhaps, I've always been inspired by the poem Shikwa or Shikva by Muhammad Iqbal, a poem that I originally heard sung by the great Egyptian singer Kulthum. And so this poem, which is a kind of a collective voice, and a shikwa, a complaint to God. Shikwa. Brother on the threshing floor, body like wheat and the red dirt that binds us, the fig trees, olives, and date palms, the treacherous murder unleashed upon us now, the call blazing from vanity's lungs, jutting us to a future of mindless rain, wayward blizzards of sand and snow. We were born to ward off this desolation that grinds mountains into floss that bores into our books for a whim that ordains blood, our blood and others, our sisters, mothers, without such fear, such hope. Who will we be? What will we do without this aching cord, without the bright morning that tore silver's towers, fire and the parched red dirt that binds, the water stolen from our wells, a black magic dredging the lower rungs of earth? We dream of clover, fire, and the parched red dirt that binds. We dream of clover. The soft scent of young lambs is the first letter of our alphabet, and the prophets who tighten ropes around their waists to stifle hunger's pangs, supplicant brows seeking light from earth's core. What will we do without the angel voice, the angel's voice, a tide sending us heavenward, a harmattan ushering us into the hell of its lows? How can we accept the quiet certainty of our graves? There must be shelter, we whisper to each other, beyond the sun's hardened gaze, an opening through the moonlit canopy of fronds, where signs alight and prayers launch. The girls walk past, hair fluttering like commas between poems of musk, a dream of touch like water gently falling on smooth, warm stone. Dusk commences, brings back the anemone's mournful dirr, stroking the dagger's spine and the gelding's nightmares. Our love for the gaze that lingers only for our eyes is all that remains of our scoured hands. Who else will hear bird song as prayer? Who will cleanse himself with the stroke of sand? Who keeps the earth rotating with praise of your name? And what will this spinning, hurtling mean without our voices shouldering it towards some ripe, sweetened pause? What will you do, dear God, without us? How will you fare alone again in the empty vast, in the dark of your creation, without us giving you your name? Thank you. So I'll try to move to somewhat shorter poems. I've been a great admirer of Japanese poetry in general and haibun form, but so I've written several haibun, which are prose and then some verse. But I've done what you might call a um, ending in the verse part. I don't necessarily just write my own, but write a kind of renga. A renga is a 5-line verse that includes poems by other poets. So I'll end with the verse, but then it begins with prose. And this is a voice of a city, of a woman. It's called Unreal City. Of course, Unreal City refers to Eliot. So, Unreal City, how would I return after all that happened? I choose to be like I was, a stubborn thing. No, not a rat or a cockroach. I mean something that has beauty about it. Maybe that's what perseverance is, to allow yourself to be pulled by some motion of the mind away from yourself. Sometimes for comfort, I think of myself as a field. I lie fallow and nurse the life within me, or like a city that can be rebuilt again. Poets would sing of my river and of my roads as veins coming to life. I have been a city, of course, a city that has kept a secret hurt under it, and in the dredging of renewal of towers and tunnels, secrets emerge, stark and horrifying. What happened to me? It is what has happened to women and cities in war, and in peace too, when life turns against itself. And who is to blame? There isn't one notion of purity that has not ravished me, not a single notion of kinship, faith, or honor that has not dug its dagger into me. And as ever, it's the strong pummeling the weak and showing little charity. I would want to return to whittle at the damage and to have what I was denied. Sometimes I think I would rather live for thinking alone, my crude function lost to me. And when beauty fades, I'll never know what it means to have had anything. I can only think of what I'd like to happen, something postponed but vivid in the mind. That's all. They crawled death ditches, tore birth canals. Their song spread a sheen of triumph on loss. It's only her grief that can cleanse the stone's thoughts, the rivers, the veins of the stars. One longer piece, but I'll read selectively from it, is called Occupation and Index. And this is, people sort of know about occupied territories. They know what they think it is to be an occupied person or occupied people. And so I decided to write it. The poem looks sort of like columns. I don't know if you can see it. It's like an index in an encyclopedia. So, and each letter gets a few entries, and these entries are very short, compressed. They're even smaller than haiku, and so I'll read some of them. I'll read the A section, and then I'll go to other letters. So it's from A to Z. So it's like an ABC or ABZ of occupation. A day's living, hands cunning drained, a murdered son for cameras to retain, a slave who has made a mistake, a song made to induce survival, a taker with no pang of guilt, a victim, it's your turn now. Air that shepherds jet fighters, missiles, drones, amicable people with whom we are on equal terms. B, barbed wire looped around huts and tents, bestial sexual license of occupied people, blaring from soldiers' loudspeakers, brainless elites, degraded masses, burying the living for sport. C, carrying filth, wood, and water, a low life indeed. Climb back to the clouds, O beloved water. D, destroyed all that belongs to them. Dig out their olive trees, burn their lentil fields, disfigure their past to paralyze their imagination. E, entropy undertaken with courage, essential duplicity of occupied people, even managed to defecate into a photocopier. Every day a story about why they're killing you, exchanged in a market of guilt. Skipping to H. How do you master innocence? How do you spin your pleading? How high must the walls rise? How long will the roads be yours alone? How long will you wish they'd just disappear? How will you explain to your children how you've crept into our lungs? I have no illness but this place. I myself had become a weapon. I remember those places, forget my loss. I wish I were there now. If I were one of them, I'd be a terrorist too. If you deserve our confidence, I'll be grateful to reach them alive. Imprisoned clan, banished kin's abode, in drawers they pulled out of desks, into plastic bags they scattered. K. Keep hope intact. Keep plunder and livestock for yourself. W. Watch your injuries spun into blame, when your conscience is not, where your pain is priced low, whimpers for mercy drawn into claws. Z or Z. Zealous patience to keep and hoard, zenith to nadir till the end, zero tolerance policy, zigzagged between the sniper's crosshairs. This is um, uh, a collection of many, many passages. Some of them are from Patrice Lumumba, some of them are from Libyan poet Rajab Bouhweish, who wrote about the genocide in eastern Libya in the 1930s, some by Israeli journalists talking about the occupation of the West Bank. Again, at least the second Intifada and what was the Israeli soldiers had done. So so there's a lot of it's a mix of 20th century. Conrad is in here as well. So a mix of 20th century horrors. All right. The problem with a big book like this one is that, you know, just maybe there's too much to read. So that's what we'll do. There's a long poem that actually was written. I guess it's always been a cornerstone of this book. It's a poem called "After 42 Years." It is written right after the death of Gaddafi, the murder of Muammar Gaddafi. And even then, I speculated about what will happen afterwards. And it seemed like that would have been a test of how things go. I'd imagined back then that, you know, Gaddafi was killed and Mussolini was killed in a horrible way, and so maybe we will have a chance to recover like Italy, but Libya unfortunately has not recovered. But the sentiment, I think, and somehow even when you write a poem about a very particular event, you're always struggling whether what you wrote will stand the test of time. And so whether your your documentation, your assessment, your wish stands. And so in the end, after revisiting the poem, trying to reconfigure it, I ended up actually ending exactly where I ended the last time. So it's nice to know that the poem still appeals and makes a humane gesture even after that much time. So I'll just read at the very end of it. It goes like this. One bullet or two, some say three, despite the pleading fingers tainted with their own blood. He looks at them as if he'd never seen or heard of blood, surprised that he too would bleed if cut. One bullet, two or three, history is captured, a knife thrust into his rectum, and he falls, kicked about and shot in the head, history tossed into a freezer, put on display. Lord, how little our lives must be when so much can be buried, lost, dumped in a hole, forgotten dust. What will our aftermath be then? We wash our hands, put on spotless clothes. There is no after until we pray for all the dead. The, the title sequence is Fugitive Atlas. Many of the poems in this sequence had appeared in a smaller chapbook called um, uh, Mare Nostrum from Saraband Books. Came out last year, but this one is it's about the migrant crisis in the Mediterranean. As you know, many of the migrants get on boats from Libya. It's a horrible experience from beginning to end, and so this sequence of poems, about 35 or so, try to start from the beginning and address the situation, or at least try to tell the story. Psalm for Departure. Locusts wrap the sun in gauze. The river swallows its banks. No pleasure but seeing the no king crop here. The no fields, a petrified forest where twin were slain. Someone will follow a bird. The work of fire never ends. Jinn built cities of mirage. The poor stand waiting by the shore. Signs made of stardust and spider thread. Any way you measure it, the difference will be a road. Of course, not all of the migrants crossing the Mediterranean are coming from Libya. Some were coming from Syria. Some are not even crossing the Mediterranean at all, but going through Turkey and Greece. And so part of the work on this was to go to Lampedusa, to Sicily, to Lesbos, and to Athens, and to just sort of know more about what happened. This is Psalm under siege. You can imagine this as a part of the civil wars that were happening, leading to the refugee crisis. Psalm under siege. Speak the body's thrift, the blood and breath sustained by a candle flame. Remembrances encircle like moss. No seagulls when fishermen return empty-handed to Arwad. Locust ravage Idlib fields, the dry wells of Dara. Candle light or soul. What else to call what remains alive in me? How it shrinks like an iris blinded by death's blazing noon.
Absolutely, going through the entire book, it's been, like I have to give it a couple of more readings now, just after hearing you read and sort of in that voice.
Yeah.
It's
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll read a few more and we'll take the questions. This, you will have to pardon my French in this poem, but this is from Agadez. Agadez is a city in Niger where many people, there's like a way station, it's the biggest one, then they try to cross into Libya. Agadez blues. No place, no money for the bed. Je dors dans la rue, paid only the way. Even God can't see me here. Police take your money. Quand tu n'as pas d'argent. Even God can't hear me here. Il te palpa tout le corps. Pour vérifier, palpa all your body. Even God can't save me here. I pay 1,300 francs go to Libye. Mais le chauffeur, il est parti. Even God can't help me here. Je n'ai plus rien pour manger. Je n'ai plus rien pour dormir. Even God can't find me here. And maybe we'll just, since this is taking so much time, I'll read two poems. One is Into the Sea, a central poem among the sequence. Into the sea. Barely out of the jetty, the boat rises with every wave, and from the back 2 or 3 fall into the sea. At sunset, the boat starts to lose air, fills with water. Mothers and babies fall into the sea. One side stays afloat. We cling to a rope, water up to our bellies, and people fall into the sea. All night we grip and bleed. Rain so cold, waves 5 stories high. If only I could fall into the sea. Sunrise, a helicopter. I find a red shirt, wave it to them. They watch us fall into the sea. They fling a small inflatable boat. I am too weak to reach it. Others try and fall into the sea. A cargo boat throws a rope to get us on board, alive at last, and we still fall into the sea. And this is Maluk's Qasida, the last poem I'll read. It is documents, if you will, arrival. The zodiacs are the big inflatable boats that people ride to get on, to cross the water. Maluk's Qasida. Lampedusa, only a dozen leagues now. The bay between it and Sus, a corridor of debris, a Phoenician graveyard. Are we prepared for the storm's paradise? The starlings recite the zodiacs on their wings. The marabouts must in kindness abide. On the wireless, the noises of rescue, the double dealing of virtue and abuse. Into a theater of salvation we ride. We are exalted into some hippopotamus, our mouths checked, hands gloved within human skin, their fingers inside. The mouths that speak are covered like Tuaregs, the eyes swathed with a dusky mirage, our names taken, flicker like fireflies, looped around our wrists, numbers that look like a kind of price. The bullhorns cry, the seagulls deride. On slippery bridges, we're wrapped in gold foil, woozy, often diseased. But who's saving whom? The question's not stated, only implied. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khaled. That was such an incredible reading. I think you can, if you have a quick look at the chat, you can see just how, just how enamored the audience were here. So one aspect of the book that caught my eye immediately were the interjections of prelude-like prose before the beginning of some poems that you had mentioned earlier. They felt like a hybrid of mini lyrical essays / poetics interlaced to sort of contextualize the smaller poem that comes as well with it. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on that.
Well, that's the form that I was speaking to, is the Japanese form called haibun. Haibun is associated with mainly with Basho. Basho was a traveling Zen poet, intellectual of the, it would have been the 17th century Japan. And that was the form that the Japanese had developed. You write a prose about your travels, and then you write a short haiku. And so it sort of creates a sort of a tension between the two. So in adopting this form, I'm paying homage to Basho. I'm claiming the position of a traveler, that I'm traveling and documenting. Except at the very end, I didn't want to write haiku. I wanted to write something like arenga. Arenga is also a Japanese form, but arenga is, like, say I write 5 lines, you take part of my 5 lines and you write yours, and then we invite a third poet to take something from the first and maybe the second poet, at least necessarily the second, and write another one. So arenga is this sort of poets borrowing from each other and evolving into a poem. So what I wanted is that after each prose part, I wanted to incorporate, sort of the voices of other poets to write sort of a very lyrical passage. Sometimes the lyrical passage addresses what I'm doing exactly. Sometimes it's further detached. I read from Unreal City. I can't remember the poets I borrowed from Unreal City, but each of them I tried to at least refer to two poets, and I've gotten to sort of create these, passages that are intense. Some of them have rhyme. I've used rhyme in this book more than ever before, but not in a very sort of consistent manner. The last poem, Into the Sea, is in 3-line stanzas, but it may sound to some people like the Urdu ghazal because of the repeated phrase. So in some ways, working with form is very important in this one. And then the last part, the last form that I experimented with is the haibon, the combination of prose and poetry. I think my ambition is, as much as this is a book about telling people in some ways what is happening and sort of weaving a number of stories together, it's also a way about saying that we have to give poetry the last word. You can tell all the stories, but you have to give poetry the last word.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. The thing is, I loved how this collection particularly danced between the personal and the political. Like, there are poems of spatial intimacy overlapped by fragments of like political discord throughout it. I was wondering how you felt about the balance of the two over your body of work and in the context of this collection.
Well, Mahmoud Darwish always talked about, saying that you're very political, and he said, well, I'm trying to be only personal. If only I could write personal verse. So sometimes when you're, if you are given a certain experience, you feel like you cannot just be personal. I mean, I'm consuming political news all the time. I have political anxieties all the time. I had a dream actually of Donald Trump last night. Politics is very ingrained in my life, but much of my life has been shaped by politics. So it's not to say that people have to write about politics, or that they should only ignore it. But I certainly feel like I need to just chronicle that side of me. Some people, emphasize this connection with the social and the political, maybe to go to that pure personal space, that pure lyric. I think I strive for that in some places. Sometimes I feel like I need to go there. I need to go to that spot, but that I think shows up in different places. That I, and then sometimes even in the dramatized voices that I use, and this book has many voices. I think all of them, or many of them, are struggling for that very personal space. Refugees, political traumas, hopefully in this privacy of the individual sphere of the pure mind. That there is solace to be found in silence and in privacy. And so, it's not maybe I don't express it necessarily from my personal life, but I certainly express that thought through some of the dramatized voices.
And especially speaking of some of the voices, the last sequence in particular, which is Fugitive Atlas. Like sort of, you had mentioned something about wandering earlier, so it sort of like drew me in with its flow and thoughts of being derived from like that, sort of it sort of had this this notion of like a wandering mystic in a transitional space, like he was sort of lost or wandering between eras. And these poems were just snippets, from his sort of from his undertaking in a way between these spaces. So I was wondering if you could talk more about traditions and the modern in your poetics.
Yeah. Well, in this sequence, I mean, it's a multitude of people coming from different places, different circumstances. Some people are coming from politically horrific situations. Some of them are, seeking refuge in a sense of existence. Some of them ambition, the desire to live a better life, a more fulfilling life, because they're ambitious people. Some of them are religious refugees. So all of these, I mean, I think that's maybe the sense of I don't know, diversity or multiplicities in the sequence, because so many people are coming from different places. In Lampedusa, we met people mostly from Africa. In Sicily, there were different people, not just from Africa. In Greece, that was the great variety of people from the Congo, from Iran, from Afghanistan, from Bangladesh, all sorts of places. So all of these are different journeys, if you will. They're different times and different crises. So that opened up the possibilities of various moods of emotion or modes of emotion. Also, traveling from space. I mean, I really try to cover this map in a carta in the Atlas sense. I try to cover West Africa as far as East Africa, and also Pakistan and Afghanistan as places of refuge. So that's that's a lot of jumping around emotionally and geographically, I guess.
Yeah, it really comes into mind with your the title, the Atlas, as you were saying, and that sort of that sense of space, that sort of sense of spatial closeness, but also expansiveness at the same time. It's beautifully rendered throughout the book. That's something I really enjoyed. And so I have I think one or two more questions before we open it up to the audience. So before we met, I'd read a few translations of Adonis you had undertaken. Desert comes to mind because I quote that all the time. Your translation of Desert, I quote that like all the time. It's one of my favorite poems, so to speak, And I was wondering how much, translating his work has, maybe if it has influenced your own work, and which other poets would you say within the Arabic speaking world, or within the within the Arabic speaking world, or within your own sort of sphere, have influenced you?
I don't know. I mean, I think when I think of like three poets who influenced me, I'll think of three. They're Cavafy, Hikmat, and Vallejo from Peru. So it's the Greece, Turkey, and Peru. But I also Whitman. I owe Walt Whitman a great deal. And then, of course, I'm envious, and in some ways, when I write thin poems, like I've tried, I'm always thinking of Emily Dickinson. So these are like, so it's like one woman and four men. It's like the reverse of the Muslim polygamy. Emily Dickinson is the queen, and she's got four male poets all over. So that's my I don't know, it's not trifecta, pentafecta, the five that I think of. I don't know. I mean, I'm drawn to the poet's work, and I've translated. And when you're translating work, sometimes part of your work is to actually is to make it a poem that you would want to be writing in some ways. So in some ways, and some people say that the translator influences the production of the translated project. some people told me that maybe my voice is too strong to translate, that I actually, when I translate, that I impose my imprint. I don't think so, but I think there might be some truth to that, that because even as a great translator as you can be, you're might be ultimately limited, and you end up maybe coloring things a certain way. But I don't know. I mean, I have not consciously tried to imitate any of the poets that I've translated. But this is not to say that they're not in the back of my mind, that they're not sort of pushing their agendas on my poetic practice. But no, the ones that I go back to and think about and say, well, maybe I can inspire by these. I mean, I always go back to these five, but I read everything. I read Basho is one that, okay, I clearly influenced me, and I didn't translate him. So I guess it's, and I think as a poet in this case, I wanted to, just sort of really bring up the sort of the artistry of poetry, if you will. I did not want this to be what people call documentary poetics. I didn't want the ethnography, and I didn't want social scientists. I just wanted to read and process all of that, and sort of write poems that kind of scream poetry, with whether with its rhyme or with its sort of shapes. Except for the prose pieces, all of the book is written in tercet. So I always chose the stanza size of all of these poems before I endeavored into this project. So in a sense, I wanted to exert maximal poetic concerns, or at least poetic emphasis. And so in a way, it blends, I hope, all of the influences. But as a poet, you cannot be too conscious of your influences. They have to be subsumed and organically taken in. If you are still, and if you're still imitating one poet, then that's like always having one finger. You need to have 10 poets writing your poetry, and they have to work together in ways that you cannot be very conscious of. So maybe Adonis is one of the 10 fingers. I don't know. I don't have names for them, but it's I'm sure when you spend so much time learning from a great poet through translation, he's part of your poetic unconscious, if you will.
Okay. So I think we can open it up to audiences now, but just before that, this series is brought to you by the University of Glasgow, especially spearheaded by Colin Hurd, who's here today as well. I was just and there's a lot of wonderful events that are happening with the University of Glasgow, especially with their Creative Conversation series. I am just putting a link to it on the chat for anybody who's interested to come and see them, because they're free and online as well. And I think we'll open up to questions from the audiences right now. And before we end, if we could have another lovely poem from you, that would be amazing.
I think there isn't enough time for the questions. We only have 12 minutes, so I'll be happy to take questions. So,
okay.
Yeah. One more poem after 9.
After the question, yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's the post party.
And that's like a bonus track.
Yes, bonus track, post, yeah. So are there any questions? You can unmute yourself if you like and ask away.
This is possibly and thank you so much. That was such an amazing reading, and I just have all the images that came up in your work going through my mind right now like a kaleidoscope. And one of the ones that stuck out particularly for me was the line, the photocopier, defecating in the photocopier, which is such an extraordinary, compelling, brilliant image. And I guess this is partly selfishly motivated. I wanted to ask about your thoughts around sort of embarrassment, I guess, in writing, or moments in a poem that feel like they take us out of the world that the poem has created?
Actually, that's very interesting. That is a horrible image. That actually is from Amira Haas is the journalist, wrote for the Guardian, and she documented, basically that was an account of the Israeli group soldiers who occupied the Ministry of Culture, and basically they did horrible stuff. Among them is this defecating on a copy machine and so on. So that seemed like an image that I kept for that purpose. But I think it's in the sequence of poems, and this is where like really working in an alphabetical order can create surprises and jumps. I mean, I can say I need to write some I's, and I write these sections, and I keep collecting these notes. And then when you put them in this sort of alphabetical order, then surprises sort of come in. Because I mean, that's a horrible image and so on. But it's actually when it comes, like really shocks you, because what comes before it and what comes after it's so different. That's the power of surprise, the power of turning of sort of chance, if you will. It's like, power of chance. So that's one of the sort of the processes that I thought about. And again, I think when you are working with chance, in some ways, it allows you to say things despite of yourself. I mean, this is sort of the surrealist commitment. If you're a surrealist, in a way, if this is inspired by surrealism, you can't like reject what the unconscious mind tells you. And so in this, I'm not going to say, oh, this is nasty, I'm not going to put it. No, you put it because it chance demands that you allow that. And your sort of the integrity of your creative process, it says that you can't censor. And in fact, perhaps the impact of the text is this sort of divergence of images and the ways it keeps yanks the reader from one place to another. And you're being yanked too as a writer, because you're like moving here and moving there and feeling that you have to pay attention to everything. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you.
Are there any more questions?
Shehzar, can I ask a question, Rabi here?
Of course.
Oh, okay. My question was that when I was listening to the poetry, those are very appealing to the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. All three sides of the feelings. I kept noticing that. But one thing, like as a very namely poet myself, what I realized was this: my poems mostly gets read by myself rather than the audience. So when you are using this kind of strong visual imagery, Mr. Khaled, sir, as you use this strong imagery in your poetries, how do you protect yourself? Like when you go and repeat it, when you edit it, these strong imageries will play in your mind a lot more times than any other reader, to be honest. How do you protect yourself from something like that?
How do you protect yourself?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think you can afford to protect yourself. I think as a writer, as a poet, you're there to be vulnerable in some ways and to be impacted. I think the protection comes from refining the work. That in some ways it's the craftsmanship that will shield you. It will say, I am handling this very difficult material, but I'm going to deliver it in a way that is appropriate, that is artistic, and I'm handling this difficult material as sensitively as possible for everyone else to sort of take it in as art, as information. I'll be the one taking the first hit of it, if you will, but the readers will have it sort of mediated in certain ways. But I think you can go into this kind of work with any sense of protection. But I think it's chiseling at the work and your desire for it to be an artistic work that will give it, will protect you, I think, in the end.
And we have one more question from the chat here. This is from Anika. I think this question's been answered already, but I missed it. When it comes to translating poetry, do you think there's a degree of appropriation of voice and emotions from the translator? If yes, how do you know what a translation has know that a translation has remained faithful to the original sentiment of the poem?
Well, faithful is you can be faithful in many ways. So that's the problem with faithful, and there's a spirit of the poem, the letter of the poem. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of the literal meaning that you're carrying, the actual meanings correctly, that you understand them correctly, but also languages do not have the same, I mean, at least words do not have the same impact from one language to another when they're rendered in that manner. So you're using the same words, but trying to make them into a sort of a different impact. Sometimes translation is like one of these cook shows, these challenges where they tell you have a can of sardine and this and a pound of sugar or whatever, and make the best out of it. And in a sense, that's really ultimately what you do, because the ingredients are right there. You can't change them, but you have to try to make the best out of, and you can't like remove the little bit of soy sauce from the thing. It's there, and so your job is to try to make something with that, with what's something that is also applicable in English. That's beautiful. That's enjoyable, and that also sort of, you know, is honest to the original ingredients. And I'm not, you know, I'm being facetious in some ways, but I think there is something true to the fact that you have to make something new out of it in the new language, because it is a different world.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been absolutely an amazing session today. And yeah, before we conclude, I was wondering if you'd see us off with a poem. And,
sure. This is the last. There are 4 poems called Beatitudes in this book, and the last one, and they're all Beatitudes in the sense of that I am learning or taking instructions from a child, from my daughter. So this is the very end. I mean, there is an ecological sort of aspect to this book, because a lot of the political crises that we're talking about, the refugee crisis, ecology is a big part of them. And so so this is the kind of conversation that I'm in the Beatitudes I'm having with my daughter. So I'll end with the last one. Beatitude. Let's walk through the woods, she tells me. Let's walk by the rocky shore at sunrise. Let's walk through the clover fields at noon. In the rainforest, she is silent, mesmerized. She'd never prayed, we never taught her, but she seemed to then, eyes alert with joy. She points to a chameleon the size of a beetle, teaches me the names of flowers and trees, insects we can eat if we're ever lost here. I'm teaching you how to entrust the world to me, she says. You don't have to live forever to shield me from it.
Thank you so much. Let's give a big round of applause for Khaled Matawa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate your time and your comments and your input.
Thank you so much. much. Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much, Khalid. Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the session. It was great. Thank you very much.
Thanks a
Amazing.
lot.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Dear friends.
And I'll send you the transcript of the chat box so you can see all the wonderful comments that have come throughout the whole session.
That's great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a beautiful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, my
I
friend.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Yes.
Do send me the chat. I'll treasure them forever.